The psychic said you were too real for their fantasy. They didn't ghost you, they ghosted their own soul. You were the divine interruption they begged the stars to send. They didn't forget you, they buried the proof. The psychic warned me they'll return when you've healed. They were drawn to your fire, but cursed the warmth. You weren't a phase, you were their soul's alarm clock. They crave your energy, but can't handle your presence. The psychic said, you cracked them open, they're still bleeding. You weren't an option, you were an initiation. They never got over you, they got distracted. You were the light that showed their shadows. They miss you most when pretending they don't. The psychic looked sad. They lost a soulmate by choice. You are still their favorite what if. They ran from you but chase your energy in everyone. You weren't hard to love. You were hard to fool. They couldn't fake being healed around you. The psychic whispered, they feel your absence like a curse. You were the universe's answer. They weren't ready for the truth. You were not intense. They were unprepared. The psychic said you left the kind of silence that screams. You were a prophecy, not a preference. They were afraid you'd see the parts they tried to hide. You were never meant to stay quiet forever. They never loved you in peace, only in panic. You didn't break them, the truth did. They didn't reject you, they rejected awakening. You triggered their evolution, they chose escape. You weren't just a lover, you were divine disruption. They pretend it was nothing, but the psychic saw everything. They carry your name in silence like a confession. You weren't unforgettable, you were unforgettable on purpose. The psychic said you were their soul's turning point. You became a spiritual ache they still can't name. They didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because you saw too much. You were never theirs to lose, just their chance to rise. The psychic said you were their mirror and their punishment. You aren't gone. You're just vibrating too high for them now. You made them feel divine. That scared the human in them. They knew what they had. They feared what they'd become. The psychic whispered, they still see your eyes in their dreams. They didn't want to love you, but their soul did. You were never a secret, just too sacred to name. You gave them healing, they gave you silence. The psychic said, they'll come back, but not as who you loved. You weren't a chapter, you were the whole book. They played it indifferent, but their energy never lied. You stirred the divine in them. That terrified the ego. They miss the version of themselves you awakened. The psychic smiled. They still crave your forgiveness. You didn't need closure. You needed clarity. They weren't cruel, just scared of being seen. You didn't chase. You carried. You were never chasing love. You were answering a call. They never healed. They just distracted the ache. You came to open doors. They slammed them shut. The psychic warned they were never meant to stay. You were the answer to the prayer they forgot. They left physically, but their spirit never left your field. You weren't overwhelming, you were honest. They see your posts and flinch. The psychic said, "You're the only thing they still believe in." You weren't abandoned, you were chosen by fate. They gave you confusion, you gave them clarity. They loved how you made them feel, not who you are. You saw them before they saw themselves. They couldn't unfeel you, so they tried to unsee you. The psychic said your soul made theirs tremble. You weren't drama, you were truth without anesthesia. They're not done with you, they just can't return as they are. You were the light they ran from, and the shadow they became. The psychic said, "They'll see you in every full moon." You weren't meant to save them, just awaken them. They told everyone you were nothing, but never stopped feeling everything. The psychic whispered, "You still echo through their spine." They avoided you, but still feel watched by your spirit. You were sacred chaos. They chose controlled emptiness. They didn't ghost you. They ghosted God's plan. You weren't a heartbreak. You were a prophecy. They felt safest when you didn't see them fully. The psychic said you shook their lineage. You weren't just their person. You were their portal. They faked peace, but your memory burns like incense. You broke a cycle. That's why they broke you. The psychic saw it. You were the miracle they feared. They don't talk about you, but their energy does. You weren't their dream. You were their awakening. The psychic said they still manifest you and fail. The psychic didn't hesitate. They were never yours, just your lesson. They crave you deeply, but fear who they become around you. You weren't crazy, you were connected. Their silence screams because their soul still hears you. The psychic said, they dream of you more than they admit. They didn't leave. Their shadow still sleeps beside you. You are their peace, and that terrified them. The psychic whispered, they still check your energy. They pretend to be over you, but their aura stutters when your name is spoken. You shook their soul in ways their ego couldn't handle. You weren't a lover, you were a mirror. The psychic said they feel you every night before sleep. You were sent to heal them. They ran from the light. They're haunted, not healed. They miss you, but not enough to grow. The psychic smiled. They'll return when it's too late. They never forgot you. They just buried the memory. You are the ache in their chest they call nothing. You didn't imagine the connection. You felt their truth. You were right. They just weren't ready. The psychic said you were the karma, not the victim. Their body moved on. Their soul didn't. They weren't your soulmate. They were your soul quake. You touched them in a place even they couldn't reach. You didn't lose them. They lost a portal. The psychic said your energy still lives in their bed. They tried to unlove you, but you became a frequency. They're scared of you. You know too much. They never apologized, but the universe heard their guilt. You are the silence that makes them flinch. The psychic laughed. They keep pulling your tarot. They left, thinking love should feel safer than this. You awakened something they weren't brave enough to face. You were never asking for too much, just the truth. They ghosted you, but still stalk your energy. You weren't intense, you were real. The psychic said their next lover will pay for what they did to you. They knew, they just weren't ready to be known. You saw their soul naked, and they hated you for it. You made them feel alive. That scared the dead parts. They were addicted to your light, then blamed you for the burn. You didn't ruin them, truth did. You were a spiritual upgrade, not a mistake. They were drawn to you like a moth to prophecy. The psychic cried, you loved them across lifetimes. You weren't wrong, you were early. They don't speak your name, but they scream it inside. You showed them their wounds, they blamed your hands. You were never meant to stay, you were meant to awaken. You weren't hard to love, they were hard to open. They never deserved you, but they needed you. The psychic whispered, they see your face in strangers. They don't miss you, they miss who they were around you. You left, but your echo didn't. You were divine discomfort, a sacred disruption. You weren't intense, they were shallow. They begged the universe for peace and got you. The psychic said you were their rebirth. They chose comfort. You came to shift them. They resisted and shattered. They keep trying to forget, but you became a vibration. You weren't the lesson, you were the test. They loved you in silence, you left in truth. They didn't lie, they feared being real. The psychic said you broke their spell. You unlocked parts of them they didn't want touched. You were alignment. They chose avoidance. They faked apathy, but their soul screamed for you. The psychic said you haunt their music. They felt safest in your chaos. You weren't the fire, you were the mirror. You saw them. That was the danger. They loved you, they just loved fear more. The psychic said they tried to unfeel you, they failed. They weren't the one, but they cracked you open. You were a portal, they ran back to the cage. They confused intensity with danger. You were depth. The psychic said they pray you don't move on. You weren't abandoned, you were redirected. They watched your worth and still walked away. You healed their past. They wounded your future. If this touched your soul, don't scroll. Like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more.